Let me ask you something. If you had $100,000 in savings by the time you turned 30, would you feel like you'd made it? Most people would say yes. $100,000 sounds like a lot. It sounds like the kind of number that means you've figured something out, that you're ahead, that you're safe. But here's what I want to explore in this video, because the honest answer is more complicated than a yes or a no, because $100,000 at 30 can mean completely different things depending on where you live, what you want your life to look like, and, most importantly, what you do with that money next. So in this video, we're going to put that number under a microscope. We're going to look at what $100,000 actually buys you at 30, what it doesn't, how it compares to where most Australians are at that age, and then, the part I think is most important, what you should actually be doing with it if you have it. Whether you've got $100,000, $10,000, or nowhere near either of those, stick around, because the principles here apply to every single amount. First, let's give credit where it's due. Having $100,000 in savings at 30 is genuinely rare. Most financial data suggests the average Australian in their late 20s to early 30s has somewhere between $20,000 and $50,000 in total savings. And for a large number of people, that includes their superannuation. So if you're at $100,000 or working towards it, you are ahead of the majority of your peers. That's real. That matters. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. But, and this is important, being ahead of average doesn't necessarily mean you're on track, because on track depends on what you're actually trying to build. Here's a way to think about it. $100,000 sitting in a savings account, earning 4% interest, generates about $4,000 a year. That's $333 a month, before tax. That's not enough to live on, it's not enough to retire on, it's not even enough to cover rent in most Australian cities. And that's not me being negative, that's just the maths being honest with you, because $100,000 on its own is not the destination. It's a very solid starting point for what comes next. The people who build real wealth don't stop at a number and feel satisfied. They use that number as a platform. And that's what the rest of this video is about. So what does $100,000 actually look like in the real world at 30? Let me give you 4 scenarios, because the same number means something very different depending on your situation. Scenario 1, the house deposit. If you're in Sydney or Melbourne, $100,000 is a solid deposit, but probably not quite enough on its own for the median house price. You're looking at needing closer to $150,000 to $200,000 to avoid paying lender's mortgage insurance and to have a buffer for stamp duty and fees. However, in Brisbane, Adelaide, or a regional area, $100,000 can absolutely be enough to buy your first home. So whether $100,000 is a good deposit depends entirely on where you want to live. Scenario 2, the Emergency Fund Plus. Financial advisors typically recommend having 3 to 6 months of expenses in an emergency fund. For most Australians in their 30s, that's somewhere between $15,000 and $30,000. So if your $100,000 is sitting in a high-interest savings account, you've got your emergency fund covered several times over, with plenty left to put to work. The question is whether you're actually putting it to work, or just letting it sit there feeling comfortable. Scenario 3, the investor. If you invest $100,000 at 30 and never add another cent, just let compound interest do its thing at a historical average return of around 7 to 8% per year, by the time you're 60, that $100,000 becomes somewhere between $760,000 and $1 million. $100,000, 30 years, nearly $1 million without adding a single extra. For most people in Australia, that's somewhere between $15,000 and $30,000. Set it aside. Don't feel guilty about it sitting in a savings account. That's exactly what it's there for. Step 2. Define your 3 to 5 year goal. The right thing to do with the rest of your money depends entirely on what you want your life to look like in the next 3 to 5 years. Are you planning to buy a home? Then you might want to keep a chunk of money in a stable, accessible place because you'll need it in a few years, and you can't afford to have it drop 20% right before you want to use it. Are you not planning to buy for at least 5 years or at all? Then investing makes much more sense because you have time to ride out any short-term market fluctuations. Your timeline changes everything. Money you need in 2 years behaves very differently to money you don't need for 20. Step 3. Put long-term money to work. Whatever is left, money you genuinely don't need for 5 years or more, should be working harder than a savings account can make it work. For a lot of Australians starting out with investing, that looks like broad market ETFs, funds that track the whole Australian or US market rather than trying to pick individual stocks. Low cost, low effort, historically strong returns over the long term. You don't need to be an expert. You don't need to watch the market every day. You set it up, you keep adding to it regularly, and then, honestly, you try not to look at it too often. Time does the heavy lifting. Step 4. Don't forget your super. This one is uniquely Australian and genuinely underused. If you're 30 and you have surplus income, making voluntary contributions to your superannuation is one of the most tax-effective investments available to you. Contributions are taxed at just 15% compared to your marginal income tax rate, which could be 32.5% or higher. That's a significant advantage most people aren't taking. Your super is also invested in markets, so it benefits from the same compound growth we've been talking about. The difference is it's locked away until retirement, which is exactly why most people ignore it. But that lock-in is actually a feature, not a bug. It stops you spending it when life gets expensive. So, is $100,000 at 30 enough? I'll give you the cleaner answer I promised at the start. Yes, if you use it well. No, if you let it sit still. $100,000 at 30 is genuinely impressive. It means you've already done something most people your age haven't. It gives you real options that most people your age don't have: a house deposit, an investment portfolio, a safety net that lets you take risks with your career. But it only stays impressive if you treat it as a launch pad rather than a landing pad. And if you don't have $100,000, if that number felt completely out of reach when you clicked on this video, I want you to hear this. The principles we've talked about today apply to every amount. The emergency fund, the clear goal, the long-term investment mindset, the superannuation contribution. None of these require $100,000 to start. They require a decision. I want to ask you one question before you go, and I genuinely want to know the answer. Where are you right now? Not in terms of a specific number, just do you feel ahead, on track, or behind when it comes to savings at your age? Drop it in the comments. No judgment. I read every single one. Because I think the most valuable thing this community can do is be honest with each other about where we actually are, not where we pretend to be. If this video helped you think about your money differently, even a little bit, hit subscribe. New video every week.